All right, good afternoon and welcome everyone to our webinar today, which is going to be Understanding Lethal Viral Necrosis. So I appreciate your time and joining us here for this educational session. And my name is Phil Harmon. I'm an extension plant pathologist with the University of Florida. And I've been studying lethal viral necrosis for a few years here. This is a troubling disease. On the agenda today, we have some overview of what what we know about this disease and the mosaic virus that causes it. We're going to go through some of the lessons learned from impacted areas, and then we're going to hear from some of our county faculty about responses and what we can do about this disease, as well as some of our industry partners as far as ways that we can source sod and challenges there. So I want to thank everyone for being here. I want to especially thank our partners who have helped us to organize this session. Sod Solutions has helped us with the organization as well as with the marketing of this free webinar. So we really appreciate them. UF IFAS Extension, several of the speakers you're going to be hearing from today are with UF Extension and the turfgrass science team. Turfgrass producers of Florida have helped us with supporting research into this problem, as well as providing us with contacts with our sod grower partners. There are going to be some FNGLA credits available that Mark Can is going to give you some more information on here in just a moment. And we'd like to express our appreciation for the Florida Turfgrass Association for helping us to, again, set this up and send out information and advertise for it. So with that, again, thank you for logging in. And I would like to introduce our first speaker here, who's going to be giving us some housekeeping information, Mr. Mark Can. He is the new Florida Territory Manager for Sod Solutions. And so at this point, I will mute my microphone, turn it over to Mark, and have him take it away. Thank you, Mark.
All right, thank you, Dr. Harmon. Good afternoon, everybody. As Dr. Harmon mentioned, I am the new Florida Territory Manager for Sod Solutions. Previously, I worked as the coordinator of turfgrass research programs at the University of Florida Plant Science Unit in Citra. I was also a former golf course superintendent for 20 years. Just to give you a little background on what Sod Solutions does, Sod Solutions, turfgrass and technology experts deliver innovative solutions for homeowners and professionals. We do this by providing improved turfgrass brands through research. We also provide software for sod farms and distributors that helps them with their accounting and inventory. And finally, we have Lawnfi and Ampagrami product lines, anywhere from fertilizer to seed. So there's lots of things that the Sod Solutions can do for the industry. A few housekeeping tips for today. Number one, today's session is absolutely free. So we thank you for joining us today, and we're glad that you could be here. This session will be recorded. We'll be sending out a link to the attendees after this presentation today. So we hope that you stay on for today, but also we understand life's busy. So each attendee will receive a post-webinar survey. We're going to ask a few questions after the survey. Hopefully it'll go out sometime this week to you. We ask that you please fill out those questions and return them back to us. And then finally, the FNGLA is providing 2 CUs to their attendees. This is just for FNGLA members. This is not FDAC CUs for pesticide licenses. So just keep that in mind, please. As far as questions today, we're going to do questions using the Q&A, not the chat. So if you can use the Q&A on Zoom to ask questions, we'll encourage you to ask questions throughout the presentations today. All of our presenters will be on to answer questions through the Q&A during the whole period, but we'll also have we'll have three question breaks throughout the presentation today. So we have 2 5-minute breaks, and then at the end we have a 10-minute break, but if we need to go a little bit longer at the end, we can do that as well. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. So first speaker who you've already heard from today is Dr. Harmon. And I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen so that he can jump on here. So Dr. Harmon is professor of plant pathology and extension turfgrass specialist for the University of Florida. He also serves as the director of the Rapid Turf Disease Diagnostic Service in Gainesville, Florida, which provides a preliminary diagnosis of turfgrass samples within 24 to 48 hours. Originally designed to assist professional turfgrass growers in Florida, the service now is available to turfgrass managers worldwide. So with that, we welcome Dr. Harmon.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate the introduction and giving us our housekeeping here for this session. What I'm going to do is first cover some of the basics of understanding what lethal viral necrosis is. We're going to talk about mosaic disease, the sugarcane mosaic virus that causes it and that is associated with lethal viral necrosis, and the current status of research into this problematic turf disease that we're facing here in Florida. I want to mention that my co-author for this presentation is Dr. Jane Polston. She is a retired virologist. She has helped me with the research aspects of this study and has been my colleague resource for the virology part of the project. As an overview, mosaic disease is something that's not new. This is a disease that we've seen for a long time in Florida. It has never been particularly problematic. And we'll go through a brief history of the mosaic disease and the sugarcane mosaic virus that causes it, as well as the new development of lethal viral necrosis, a syndrome of symptoms that has been associated with that same virus that causes mosaic. Lethal viral necrosis does kill lawns and has been very problematic for us where it has occurred. I'll briefly go through the research to date and management options for preventing spread, including lethal viral necrosis resistant varieties that you'll hear more about later in the seminar. So viral turfgrass diseases are not common. Most of the diseases we deal with are fungal in Florida. This disease that we're talking about today is viral. Viruses are a little different than some of the other pathogens that we deal with. Mosaic is the disease that we have known about for a long time. Sugarcane mosaic virus is a virus that was first found in sugarcane, and it also affects other grass hosts, including St. Augustine grass. Since the 1960s, this disease and this virus has affected St. Augustine grass in rural Palm Beach County. It has occurred. It has never caused an economically important, impactful disease up until about 2013. The virus can also infect other grass hosts, including Bermuda grass, some paspalums, some crabgrasses, and some pennisetum grasses. It is also a problem on crop grasses. In addition to sugarcane, we see it in corn or maize. So we have known about this again in St. Augustine grass for decades, literally, but it has not been a major economically impactful disease. The mosaic disease gets its name from the symptom of mosaic, which is broken yellow lines or in a distinct pattern on St. Augustine grass leaf blade. Now, this can occur in a lawn and can be difficult to detect if you don't know what you're looking for or where to look for it. So it's a mild symptom. It's something most people overlook, not something that's been particularly problematic. The lethal viral necrosis symptoms, on the other hand, have been much more troublesome and have also been associated with sugarcane mosaic virus in St. Augustine grass. This started in 2013, and these are new symptoms that have occurred beyond what we know to be caused by mosaic disease and the sugarcane mosaic virus. It was first reported and confirmed in Pinellas County. It was also probably occurring in Palm Beach County at the same time. 2013 and 14 is when we really started to see this affecting lawns in severe manners such that they needed to be replaced. So we called this new set of symptoms that included death of the grass and economically important disease, lethal viral necrosis. It is associated with the sugarcane mosaic virus. The difference between lethal viral necrosis and mosaic and the symptoms are that the yellowing progresses from a yellow, difficult to detect symptom to a brown, systemically transmitted symptom that will kill Floratam grass that it infects. So we have mild yellowing versus death of the grass and requiring regrassing in many cases after the infection. Dr. Romina Gazis is going to talk more about the specific symptoms and how to detect that and how to sample for it a little later in the presentation. But early on in the mosaic and lethal viral necrosis story, we found that the disease, lethal viral necrosis, occurred on Floratam lawns, where we had lawns like this one pictured that had mixtures of grasses. This non-Floratam genotype of St. Augustine grass developed mosaic. The Floratam also developed mosaic, but after the first cool evening temperatures in the fall of the year, the Floratam then progressed from mosaic into the lethal viral necrosis that's killed this sod that's been installed here in this lawn. So that was the main difference. Floratam has been the affected grass, and It is, as I mentioned, not a formal published disease name. It is something that we don't know scientifically with great confidence the complete cause of the disease. So we call it a syndrome. We know that a syndrome is a group of symptoms associated with a pathogen, in this case, Sugarcane Mosaic Virus, and it requires some additional research to prove the causation and formalize the name of this as a new disease after peer review and publication. And that's something that's ongoing. Doesn't mean that we can't come up with some management recommendations, and I'll certainly share with you the most up-to-date research that we have so far. But 100% of the samples that we've seen of LVN, or lethal viral necrosis, have tested positive for Sugarcane Mosaic Virus. The distribution of the virus and the lethal viral necrosis started in Pinellas, as I mentioned, moved from Pinellas and Palm Beach County slowly in Pinellas County, north and south, such that it still remains within Pinellas County, affecting hundreds, if not thousands of lawns. In Palm Beach County, the spread was a little more rapid, and it has reached Glades and Collier County within the last year. And so it's spread from Palm Beach north and then south, but the distribution is very spotty. It's not a completely wall-to-wall distribution by any means. There are scattered communities that are affected, and they're severely affected when they become affected, but not every Floratam lawn, certainly within these counties, has the disease. The disease is spotty and where it occurs throughout these counties, but this is where we have confirmed it. There have been reports in Hillsborough County, not confirmed, as well as in Fort Myers, Florida as well. Now, let's talk a little bit about research and results. I'm not going to go through this in great detail due to time limitations, but we initially started with a viral metagenomic study to try to determine which viruses were causing this disease. Was it one, more than one, etc.? We used an Illumina next generation sequencing technology to do this, and we found 2 viruses within the samples that we collected and processed. The Sugarcane Mosaic Virus was always present, as well as a second virus. Our validation steps in this research were not able to show that that second virus was involved. It was there in the first sampling, and subsequent samplings we couldn't find it, but it did complicate our research for a time after we discovered that second virus. The research project 2 that I want to talk about is then once we had confirmed Sugarcane Mosaic Virus was indeed associated and causing this mosaic disease and this lethal viral necrosis syndrome that followed, we took the virus from the samples and put it into additional sod varieties. We also put it into Floratam that was healthy from 3 different sod farms. The result was mosaic disease and symptoms, the yellow streaks on the grass blades that you see here in this picture. And then it pretty much stopped. In the greenhouse, this is as far as the disease went. When we took the infected grass that we'd inoculated into a cool temperature incubator, some of the Floratam that we had inoculated indeed developed this death symptom, this lethal viral necrosis, where the grass turned brown and a yellow bronze color and then eventually died. Other varieties and 1 sample of Floratam did not die after we exposed the grass to the cooler temperatures. This shows a little bit closer the yellowing on some of the leaf blades that progressed after the 64 degrees Fahrenheit exposure to the lethal viral necrosis that we see in the field, and that's killing Floratam lawns in the Floratam genotype. When we looked at the varieties that we inoculated, we looked at 3 different Floratams from 3 different farms. 1 of the Floratams did not die, but developed mosaic, even when exposed to the 64 degrees Fahrenheit temperature. The sample that we collected was our control, and it did develop the necrosis. None of the other varieties that we tested developed necrosis or lethal viral necrosis symptoms. They all stayed mosaic, which is a mild symptom, and again, not something that's caused economic concern. So only 2 of the Floratam accessions died. Why is that? That was the question that I brought to Dr. Kevin Kenworthy, our turfgrass breeder here at UF. And what we found is that there are challenges with the variety genetic purity that we're going to talk about today in this webinar. He's going to cover some of those and some of our industry partners from Sod Solutions and from the Turf Producers Florida as well. So we appreciate them coming in and being involved here and helping us to organize this. We did an additional sampling in 2020. Last year, we collected 47 samples. We had 33 individual stolons that Dr. Kenworthy's lab genotyped. He'll talk a little bit more about the results there. The samples that we collected either had lethal viral necrosis, mosaic, or were asymptomatic. And the samples were from lawns that were reported to be bitter blue, citra blue, palmetto, Floratam, and then some that we didn't know what they were exactly. When we took those into my lab and we used the results that Dr. Kimberly came up for the genetic testing, tell us what these grasses actually were. All 9 of the LVN samples that we tested were in fact Floratam genetics, despite what they may have been presumed to be when they were collected. Mosaic samples were palmetto, citra blue, and raleigh. He'll talk more about that again. But again, this association with the lethal symptom and Floratam has held and is 100% the Floratam genetics being, for some reason, responsible for this lethal viral necrosis. That's a process that we don't fully understand at this point. We did in the Boynton Beach sampling, collect those samples that included Floratam that had lethal viral necrosis and Floratam that had mosaic, and we redid the virus metagenome sampling to try to determine if that second virus was still present. Sugarcane mosaic virus was detected from all of the symptomatic grasses, LVN and mosaic, and none of the samples had the second virus. So it does not appear that that second virus plays a role at this point. That simplifies our life a little bit for research into this and validates some of those earlier inoculations that we did with the sugarcane mosaic virus in the absence of the second virus. So we are making progress there in the research. It's been a little bit slow, as research usually is. So to summarize, mosaic has a patchy distribution around the state. If we suspect it in a lawn, it's a good idea to get it tested. There are other things that Dr. Aziz will talk about that can look similar to this disease, although it is fairly distinct in how it looks. Send pictures to me or to your local county extension faculty. In many cases, we can tell by looking, particularly if you're in a county we know is affected, and get a diagnosis that way. It's very destructive. This lethal viral necrosis is very destructive to Floratam, and it can't be managed with fungicides or other inputs. Disease severity can vary from year to year and lawn to lawn, as with all diseases, but in the end, Floratam lawns have succumbed to this. They have become unacceptable in turf quality after a number of years. That number of years has varied from 1 to 3 to 5. On average, it's about 3. Floratam is a very good grass, and it's very popular because of those positive characteristics that it has. There are other varieties we'll talk about today that are resistant to lethal viral necrosis. They don't develop that lethal viral necrosis death symptom when they're infected with sugarcane mosaic, but they do have other challenges that we can talk about. So this virus is, like all viruses, is obligate. It has to have a plant host to multiply. It can't multiply outside the plant. It's spread in moist plant sap, and so that has some management implications that we'll go through. It has to get inside a new plant to be spread. The moist plant sap with the virus is harmless unless it's put into a new plant, and it doesn't survive long outside the plant. That's in our benefit and our favor, and what's been responsible for the spotty distribution and relatively slow spread of the disease. It doesn't affect palms or other ornamental plants except for a few ornamental grasses. It's not a problem for pets, people, or wildlife, and it only kills, so far, Floratam lawns and grasses with Floratam genetics in them. So we'll talk more about that moving forward. Moist plant sap is something that occurs normally when we mow. We cut the grass, moist plant sap leaks out, tires grind moist plant sap into the new areas of the lawn, and that's the primary mechanism for spread of the virus. Now, it's not the mower's fault. It's going to occur with any mower that cuts that grass and then goes over that grass. It's just a fact of the matter that this is primarily spread locally, small distances, short distances, by mowers. Moving that fresh plant material on mowers is something we want to try to avoid. That can move the virus from lawn to lawn. That's something that we can talk about as far as management options. And to do that, we want to allow plenty of time for plant sap to dry on any equipment that we're using, including mowers, particularly when we're going between accounts, between communities, or when we're moving equipment from place to place. Removing the material from equipment, leaving it on site is what we recommend there to try to minimize that. Can we sanitize our mowers? Yes, we can. Sanitizers are very effective at killing viruses, as we've all learned through this recent coronavirus pandemic and problem. We can kill virus on mowers as well. Household bleach is one of the best, but it's quite corrosive to our equipment. There are commercial sanitizers and products that we can also use when used directed by their labels. They're very effective. Virkon S is one that has some data behind it for plant viruses. Green Shield, Pine Sol, various alcohols, all should be effective at sanitizing viruses on our equipment. Now, this is not always a feasible thing for us to do lawn to lawn, but it is something that we recommend be incorporated where possible to help minimize the chance that your equipment is spreading the disease. It's not spreading irrigation water by soil unless there's plant propagules in that soil that are infected, such as the seeds or vegetative propagation materials of infected turf. So soil itself airborne does not spread the virus by itself either. It can be spread by aphids, but not very well. Aphids are a rare transport, but what that means is that we have a mechanism besides mowers that can move it from community to community rarely. That gives us challenges as far as preventing spread into new lawns. Should clippings be removed? No, leave them in the lawn, but remove them from equipment, as I mentioned, between communities or lawns. Later on in the presentation, Dr. Brian Unruh is going to talk about some of the best management practices for renovating a St. Augustine grass lawn. The main take-home message here, though, is that if you have a lawn that's failed due to lethal viral necrosis, do not regrass with Floratam. So selecting a grass with a different genetic background and makeup is crucial. There are challenges to doing that successfully that we'll talk about today, and some potential solutions for doing just that, replacing a lawn with something other than Floratam. Lawns restarted with palmetto survive. They get mosaic disease. The virus is present, but they make a good lawn. If we put Floratam back in the same lawn, it more rapidly than the previous time, will die from the virus, and homeowners are not going to be happy with that outcome because it's a lot of money then wasted. So we want to try to keep this virus out of new areas. We don't want to mow when grass is wet. That increases the chances of successfully moving it, and limiting, again, the movement of fresh plant material between lawns is the primary goal for removing the chance of spreading that on your equipment. For folks who are dealing with this out in the landscape areas, if you suspect a problem, have it confirmed by testing. And again, if this is a Floratam lawn, it's not likely that fungicides or other inputs, no matter how much we spend on them, are going to help. The grass is going to die, so don't waste your money on them. And that is what I have for the first part of this presentation. And we are going to have questions, as mentioned in the question and answer section of the Zoom presentation as we go through. I really, again, appreciate everyone coming out and for your attention. And I'll turn it back over to Mark and stop sharing my screen at this point. Thank you, Mark.
All right, Dr. Harmon, we got a little bit of time. There was one question I saw in here. It says, has the disease been documented in Martin and St. Lucie counties?
Yeah, so we've had reports of it in Martin County, and that has been confirmed. St. Lucie, I'd have to check on. I think it's safe to assume it's probably there in very small incidents. And if you saw a lawn that had some of the symptoms you're going to see today from Dr. Disease, then I would say contact us. For those counties that are not lit up on my map, I'll cover the cost of the initial test. If you think you have it in a new county, please do send it in. After it's been confirmed, then there's a charge for each of those samples that are sent in that helps us pay for the reagents that we use. But I think it's safe to say it's throughout much of South Florida, but that it is very spotty in its distribution. So the diagnosis section of it is important for us to carry out, to confirm before we move forward with management and replacing lawns.
And we still got one more question. It says, could you prevent the mosaic from reaching, I'm assuming this means the LVN stage?
Yeah, good question. And if you were able to keep grass warm the entire year, you would not see that transition. However, even down in the Keys, we are seeing that cool evening temperatures and additional other stresses that can come along and result in that stressed plant switching from the mosaic to the lethal viral necrosis symptom. So far, we have not. I'd say that ideal horticultural inputs, managing the lawn as best you can help, I'd say, delay the inevitable death of the Floratam that's been infected. And I've seen that work in varying degrees, but not much more than 3 years of keeping a Floratam lawn alive after that. So Floratam will eventually die. That's what we've seen. Up to 95% of the lawn will become infected and die. You'll have a little bit of Floratam left that will start to recover in the summer, and weeds will come in and be a challenge for us. That's what we've seen in all the cases so far. So no way to prevent it from going from mosaic to lethal viral necrosis in Floratam. If we put another variety of grass in there, we've seen that it does not progress. We only get mosaic.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Harmon.
Thank you.
With that, we're going to go ahead and move on to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Bill Shaw. Bill is a commercial horticulture extension agent for IFAS Extension for Palm Beach County. He works primarily with pest control operators in the nursery industry. Bill first spotted Lvn in Palm Beach County around 2013. After initially thinking it might be herbicide damage, it was eventually identified in the lab as Lvn. He and his colleagues have seen a rapid spread of Lvn since 2013 and have developed a website to educate others about the syndrome. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Bill Shaw.
Very good. I hope you all can see my screen. I believe I have it up so far. And can you hear me, Mark?
Very good.
Okay, very good. Here we go. So as Mark said, I'm Bill Shaw. I'm a commercial horticulture agent here in Palm Beach County. This is my contact information for the time being. I'm going to be retiring pretty soon, but that email address will remain active through my retirement. All right, so a little bit of the material has been covered so far by Dr. Harmon and by Mark, but we did first spot it in 2014, or positively confirmed it via lab test through Dr. Harmon's lab in 2014, but we spotted it actually the year before, and we thought we were dealing with take-all root rot and probably herbicide damage at the time, but as we moved through a few months, it became apparent there was something else going on, and then got the positive diagnosis of the what used to be called Sugarcane Mosaic Virus, now Lvn. Once we knew what we were looking for, then it seemed initially in Palm Beach County to be centered in western Boynton Beach and in the village of Wellington. It was pretty heavy there at those times, and as mentioned earlier, it spread pretty rapidly throughout much of the county, and it's become a very, very expensive situation for many of our communities in the county now, with grass replacement as the primary mechanism to deal with it. All right, so what I'd like to do is share with you a little bit some of my observations from the commercial standpoint, and also comments that have been made to me by pest control operators and landscape maintenance personnel as they've been dealing with this. So one thing that's helpful, and many of you that work with customers know this, is that, well, first of all, the correct diagnosis at the onset does allow you to avoid putting out product that's not going to help in any way. Product like fungicides or insecticides, that type of thing. Customers may be asking you to do that, and if you don't know what's going on out there, you may be willingly doing that to try and solve the situation. But if you can correctly diagnose it, then you don't have to worry about that. It requires you to educate the homeowner association board members and property managers as much as possible as to what to expect from this disease if they're not familiar with it. They need to, this is going to be an expensive, most likely a very expensive situation for their community, and they need to be able to communicate with residents accurate information and what they can expect to occur as it progresses in the community. So as you might expect, some residents will resist the expense, and in a number of the communities that I've interacted with, it's quite substantial. So they may do an initial assessment, and then usually because it can't all be paid for in 1 year, or they'll phase their replacement, they'll build into their association fees for the following years to pay for all that. And then you have the other folks who want immediate replacement too when their lawn starts looking bad. So proactive sod replacement program, it does demonstrate to the residents that something is being done and that their turn will come, hopefully. So in some communities, now that we've been dealing with this for a few years, And those of you that work with large homeowner associations know this, that a lot of times, other than a few people, they may not know what's growing out there. and the number of times I've heard people call crabgrass carpet grass is is a lot. So sometimes just green is enough to get you through it for a while too, if it's not dead looking out there. You can also recommend, hopefully, patience to customers until more replacement cultivar options come along. And we've been urging patience and waiting for Citra Blue to come along and be available. And you'll hear more about that particular cultivar later today from other speakers. Another thing that I've found is in these communities, you're often talking about several hundred individual homes, if not more, usually broken up into what they call different pods or different neighborhoods. And they really, to put their plan together, they need to assess what's going on in each homeowner's lawn. So I've sometimes recommended consultants who can go in there and do that specific analysis for them on a yard by yard basis. And the other plus of that is they can identify other problems too, and then help the communities put together a plan for how to deal with this, typically in a phased manner, so it's more affordable. So some homeowner associations, as you might expect, don't have the resources or would rather see the problem go away in hopes that it will, but as we know, it won't. So at some point they'll have to deal with it, but that's a dynamic that you may deal with out there. And the other thing that often happens is the HOA or the property managers expect the pest control operator to fix the situation with treatments. That's what they're paying for, right? Is for things to be taken care of. But it's useful to think about how you're going to respond to that. And as I kind of mentioned a little bit earlier, if you can start educating the board and the property managers about lethal viral necrosis, maybe even before it shows up in their community, then they're going to be more receptive to the proper handling of it once it does arrive, if it does arrive. Now, one issue is, what am I actually putting in when I replace sod? And there's a lot of misinformation and misuse of terms about registered or certified sod. So with the help of Dr. Harmon and Dr. Kenworthy, I wrote this blog here. You may want to take a screenshot of it if you're interested in it, but it gives kind of an outline of how certified sod relates to the new Citra Blue cultivar, which will, as I said, will be mentioned more a little bit later in this presentation today. So there's also clearly in comments that I hear from folks out there, a need for additional replacement options from the industry. Some of you may be aware that if you go further north, mixed cultivar lawns are fairly common, not so common down here, but we do have a professor, an entomologist, Dr. Dale, up at UF, who's looking at doing a little research on mixed cultivar lawns and gotten some positive results from that. So if that continues to be useful, that might be something that we'd like to see commercially produced, if it makes sense. And then there's a lot of unknown or misinformation out there, and the continued research from Dr. Kenworthy, Dr. Harmon, and others to help answer some of these questions as best we can is folks out there know those names now of those folks and would like to see that research continue. And then also in between the internet and information that's given out by some contractors and so on who maybe don't completely understand lethal viral necrosis, or they feel like they've come up with a a way to correct it with a product of some sort. So that's misinformation, and I think the solid research base from UF and then education out of UF, either by county faculty or statewide faculty, can help communities sort through that misinformation. So recommendations changing over time have confused folks a little bit. We've changed the name from what we originally called it. And Dr. Harmon explained pretty clearly how that all fits together in his presentation. But, we were recommending bitter blue at one point as a replacement, but because of the contamination issues with bitter blue and available quantities, for instance, it didn't end up being a great option for folks to use. So we need to be aware that our recommendations are changing a little bit. We need to keep folks up to speed on that. So the sanitation practices Dr. Harmon mentioned, depending on who you talk to among the contractors, they may often feel that it doesn't slow the spread very much, at least in Palm Beach County, where the spread has probably been among the quickest in the state. So whether or not the virus was already inoculated into lawns and then it showed up, symptoms showed up after that, and it was inoculated before sanitation practices took place, or maybe the contractors aren't being as consistent with that as they indicate they are, or for whatever reason. But there's a sense that the sanitation is helpful, but it hasn't slowed it a whole lot, at least in this county. And then that with the mowers as being the primary means of spreading, the question comes up, as always, when you start talking about big money, is who's to blame for that? So if you are a contractor or you're advising contractors, it's good to think through how you're going to respond to that too, if they want to blame you as the source of it. The other lesson that's been learned is small area replacement, like part of a lawn or putting in plugs, is generally quite a bit more expensive per unit of grass that you're putting out there than doing larger areas or larger blocks. So as you work with communities to come up with a plan, a phased plan, if they can do larger chunks at one time rather than little bits and pieces here and there, overall their expenses they'll save some money. And then again, as I kind of touched on before, most communities can't afford complete replacement all at once. That may well be millions of dollars in communities that wasn't in their budget. So they need to come up with a way to pay for that. And phased replacement over a few years, at least a couple of years or more, is one way for communities to be able to do that. Zoysia grass is sometimes thought of as a Floratam replacement, but from the contractor's standpoint that I've spoken with, it costs more to maintain that than what we do as a standard practice, I guess you could say, or standard practices for Floratam. So typically what I see are trials in highly visible areas like in front of clubhouses and that type of thing, where they'll go ahead and go the zoysia grass route and determine whether or not they can even manage zoysia grass, because most of these communities have not used zoysia grass, as Floratam's been kind of the standard turf grass to use out there. And then the question that often comes up, which is going to be touched on later, I believe, by Dr. Unruh, is do we need to remove the old Floratam before we install the new sod? And, how should you handle all of that? But, if a community is spending, $100,000 at a shot, or $200,000, or eventually quite a bit more even in many cases, obviously from the contractor standpoint, you want that lawn to look pretty sharp after your installation so they feel like they've gotten their money's worth. And unless there's any questions, that is it for me. Do we have any questions?
So I'm not seeing any questions. A couple things I could think of are, do you have I don't know if you can answer this, or maybe Dr. Kemmerly or Dr. Harmon, but as far as Dr. Dale's study with the mixed cultivars, do we know which cultivars he's using in that study?
I don't know. Dr. Kenworthy, or I don't know if you're there or not. Just off the top of my head, I don't know.
Yeah, he's used everything that was commercially available at the time he initiated that study.
I guess the other question too is, Bill, when you're going into these communities and they're choosing to go ahead and replace the turf grass in the area, what do you think is their most important factor when they're determining what to replace with it? Are they looking at mostly they just want LVN resistance, or are they looking at just a better turf grass that has certain attributes versus the previous grass they had in there?
Well, I think clearly it's LVN resistance. Mostly we've been recommending, especially once we drop bitter blue, palmetto down in this area of the state as a replacement. So if they want to stay in the St. Augustine group. So there aren't a whole lot of options for them to choose from. I think if there are more, if we add more along the way, then the attributes would become more important. But I always tried to make it clear to them that any cultivar is going to have different management requirements. So palmetto is managed a little differently down here from a fungal disease management standpoint than Floratam is. But they don't have a whole lot of options to choose from to go much beyond the LVN resistance.
We've got time for one more question that just popped up. It says, I've been told that there's a visible difference in appearance between Citra Blue and either Floratam or Palmetto St. Augustine. Think of a maintenance appearance of total community. Should one type be only mandated, assuming that it's a legally viable option?
Well,
it's open to any of the panelists. So.
Some others may want to add in on this too, but there's always this argument, which has been confirmed kind of here. If you go with a monoculture of one cultivar, then if a problem develops, then you've got a big problem. The other side of it is if you're going with, say, multiple cultivars, and they all have slightly different or even very different management requirements. The reality is they're mostly all going to be managed the same. So, I think from the standpoint of thinking about future diseases, it would be nice to have a variety of things within communities.
Okay.
And if I could just add from our standpoint that Dr. Kenworthy and I looked at some lawns in Central Florida that the management company suspected were mixed cultivar lawns, and there can be instances where you've got maybe a dwarf variety mixed with a non-dwarf, or when, as Bill says, the care regimens for the different types are different enough that there's a difference in the appearance. So that we are super excited by Adam's research on the mixed cultivar lawns, but also wondering how we're going to be able to look at some of those differences.
Mm-hmm.
All righty.
Yeah, let me add one other thing on that question. So Citra Blue's color is going to be very visually different than what you're going to see in a Floratam and Palmetto. And Palmetto is a little bit more dwarfy than you're going to see, like Betsy mentioned, compared to Floratam. So if you're trying to blend some of that in together, You may see some differences. There's going to be some obvious different management practices on mowing heights for each of those varieties and recommendations on water requirements and fertility when it's comparing Citra Blue, Floratam, and Palmetto. So that's just another way to look at that as well.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. We're going to go ahead and move into our next speaker. Our next speaker is Lori Albrecht. She is IFAS Extension Environmental Horticulture Agent, also in Palm Beach County. Along with her colleague, Bill Shaw, she has been educating green industry professionals, community association personnel, and municipality leaders and residents about lethal viral necrosis since it was first identified in the county. So with that, we're going to welcome Lori Albrecht.
Thanks a lot. Everybody can see my screen and hear me, correct?
Looks good.
Okay, well, thank you, Bill. We work together, Bill and I, in Palm Beach County, which is a very populous county. And we have over 5,000 community associations in our county, second highest in the state. We have more property managers than any other county in the state. And as Bill mentioned, you know, we've been dealing with this disease for quite a while. I was only in the county for a year when, you know, it was first diagnosed positively. And as Bill mentioned, we had epicenters in the beginning. But now since 2018, what I've noticed is that the disease has really started spreading, and it's widespread, even in the northernmost parts of our county, which is where I live. So many people have, you know, in the western part of the county, even associations who know people in other associations, they have been more familiar with this disease than the northern part of the county, where it's just starting to really hit. And one of the things that happens when we go into community associations is they've got a lot of questions. They come fast, they come furious, as Dr. Harmon knows from speaking to them, Bill knows, because we've all been out there trying to get as much education as we can out. And one of the things that used to come up used to be the idea of there being a vaccine that comes out sometime within the next couple months that is going to completely solve this problem. And given the events of the last year, I think that's going to go a long way to explaining to people why this is very unlikely to happen in the time frame we're looking at, because the disease, it's really, you know, a lawn will die within 3 years or less. And of all these questions that people have, and, you know, we answer, we speak to large groups of people who live in HOAs. One of the ones that becomes very, very serious, and there's the most perhaps anger about, is this last one. And that is, who's going to pay for this? Because the homeowners, the associations do not want to pay. And I know from talking to boards that they will go to their insurance companies, and I've yet to hear of any insurance company that, yes, you know, we're going to cover the millions of dollars that this may cost to replace the turf grass in your community. Of course, what comes up, unfortunately, for those of you in various aspects of the business is, who can we sue? You know, which is a very real question if it got there. You know, they want to know that. And the one thing I will say from going to community associations is that I have seen associations where I can't really tell you how it actually got there. And by that, I mean, I've been in an association, they had all new equipment that never left the site. So they couldn't have brought it in from anywhere. And it showed up on one lawn in the middle of the community. How does one explain that? So, you know, I know Dr. Harmon talks about sometimes incidental spread by possibly aphids or things like that. So, you know, this is a very, very difficult issue, but Lethal viral necrosis is a people problem as well as a disease problem. You know, when we get out there actually talking to people and we take it out of the scientific realm, the emotional responses to the diagnosis are, you know, Bill sort of mentioned denial. It's really only going to be a couple of lawns, because the first year, and this is the progression that typically I've seen anyway, is it will show up in a few lawns. And I will go in there and I will explain, you know, the progression and what might happen over the ensuing years. And oftentimes they really don't believe me. They don't want to believe me. Because what happens is it's a few lawns and then the next year, maybe a few more. And then at a certain point, there's an explosion. But since it is associated where you first see it, new cases are cold weather, then when the warmer weather comes in, they think, oh, see, it's all gone. And the other thing that happens is magical thinking. And this is, we can somehow stop the spread. We have these two or three lawns. And if we just do the right thing, then with the outset, it will never spread any further. And that is unfortunately not what we have seen with this disease. There is a lot of anger, and I have kind of physically placed myself between landscapers and an angry crowd. You know, as agents, we kind of have to deal with these emotional responses. And then as Bill mentioned, you know, there is the blame game. You know, who am I going to, you know, point the fingers at and say they did this, you know, to us. And another one early on, when there were only a few communities that were hard hit, it was why us? You know, why this community? That's gone away a little bit now. And I have to say, as much as, you know, anyone can know about the disease, I was probably one of the more knowledgeable people in our county. But it really changed for me when we got our first positive in my own homeowners association, because it was no longer academic to me. I got called out. It was the Thanksgiving weekend. I went out, I looked at it, you know, after you've seen this, even though, yes, you send it for testing, I knew. And I have to tell you that my initial reaction when I saw it actually was an emotional reaction. I was like, dang, I was angry. You know, how did this happen? If only. That lasted a very short period of time for me, because I was like, Lori, get a grip. You know, this is what you talk to homeowners associations about. And then of course, my next was, what is this going to cost? So in my homeowners association, we have 561 homes. And when I priced it out with our landscaper, and this was in last year's costs, if we replaced it all at one time with a bulk discount, and we got a very, very good price from our landscaper because they want to keep the contract, it was over $3 million. That is a lot of money. So the economic impact of this for people is huge. And I know Dr. Harmon's gotten them, and I have gotten them, the phone conversations where people call us and they say, I'm a senior citizen. I am on a fixed income. I can't afford this. And it's heartbreaking. It is heartbreaking for people, you know, who are experiencing this issue. So when we're dealing with the association boards, and they also have a lot of questions because they're the ones who have to figure out what the policies are going to be for their constituents. And, you know, board members may have a lot of experience in whatever professions they've been involved in, but oftentimes have very little knowledge base about horticultural issues. So yes, there are those issues of, do we have assessments? And then, you know, is there any way to possibly slow the spread? What are the alternatives and which ones should we select? And I have to say, one of the positives, if I can call it that, of my HOA contracting this disease, it is that I think it made me a more sensitive and perhaps better extension agent dealing with this issue. Because while I realized that, you know, Bill and Dr. Harmon and I had done the best job that we possibly could in going out there and educating people, there was a whole aspect of this disease that I had not been talking about. And once it happened to my HOA, I realized the incredible need for that. And that was to really take people through, the replacement methods. How do you make those choices? What do you do? Because there are an awful lot of questions, and Dr. Unruh is going to be speaking to this about, how you go about replacing the lawn and establishing the new lawn. And, a lot of non-understanding from people that even though this disease is not in the soil, well, so why do you have to, why do you have to maybe remove, some of the old lawn or things like that? The associations really, have to grapple with issues like how much are they going to be responsible for? And some associations, what they've done is they've actually, taken over. Yes, we're going to be responsible for assessing people. We want the front lawns to all look nice to keep the aesthetics of our community, but the back lawns are going to be the responsibility of the homeowners. And then there are issues they have to deal with, well, what if people just don't comply and they refuse to replace a lawn that is not looking well? And how are they going to deal with those payments? They also want to know, what have other associations done? And as an extension agent, I really don't want to be publicizing which associations have the disease for resale issues, as well as I don't think it's really my place to be saying, oh yeah, they have it here, 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 and there. But the boards really want to know. They want that benefit of what other people have done. A huge issue for the associations is, of course, the issue of herbicides. And those of us in the industry know about the lawsuits associated with glyphosate, with some of the misinformation that is out there on the web. And it becomes a huge issue for the boards because when we get to replacement, as soon as it's mentioned killing the lawn, and one of the least expensive, most effective ways to do that would certainly be using glyphosate. And the mention of that word, I have known from far too many presentations I've done, will elicit an emotional response. I will say in the HOAs I've dealt with over this issue with lethal viral necrosis, they will tell me, yeah, at first it was an issue and we're so far past that. In my own association, with a couple of lawns, when they said, well, we're going to come in and we're going to use glyphosate, and there was outrage, and I was at the meeting and I was talking to people about it. And however, the lawn became so unattractive that, eventually that person called up and said, I don't care, come spray, replace my lawn. And I know Dr. Harmon and I both dealt with an association earlier this year. They were sort of, without my knowledge, contacting him, and probably without his knowledge, contacting me and asking the same questions to see if they could get a different answer, maybe when they wanted more. But that association too had an issue with the first people not wanting to use glyphosate. But sure enough, it looked bad enough that eventually the person did not care. It was just, I want my lawn to look okay. But this is something that they struggle with. Another issue that comes up, and something certainly not the sod producers don't want to hear, or landscapers, after they learn that lawns can get diseases, then there's pushback. Okay, well, let's just replace with synthetic turfgrass. And I will say, because I deal with municipalities, I have been contacted by municipality commissioners, and people come to municipalities and they bring in Florida-friendly information and they say, well, you need to approve synthetic turfgrass because it is, quote, Florida-friendly. Because we're trying to, reduce inputs, reduce water consumption. And I want to make it very clear, and I make it clear to them, that the University of Florida does not consider synthetic turfgrass to be Florida friendly, unless something has changed very recently from the last time I contacted Dr. Unruh about this. There haven't been any leaching and runoff testing for the residential synthetic turfgrass that uses sand as a ballast. I have questions as a horticulturalist with how it is installed with the serious compaction, which compaction can affect tree roots possibly. Obviously, this has not been studied, but I do have anecdotal reports from landscapers who have noticed there has been some crown dieback in trees where the roots have been severely compacted by the installation. There are possibly heat issues with, you know, what's going on with the tree roots and things like that. Disposal issues after its lifespan. So there are a lot of reasons why, you know, this is not considered to be particularly Florida friendly, but it comes up. It comes up in almost now every single presentation that I do to an HOA.
Hey, Lori.
To mention the unreliable information, the internet is great, but you know, yes, there are lethal viral necrosis conspiracy theories. You know, there's stuff out there. It's a hoax by people who don't like turfgrass. You know, and I tell people, well, I don't think Dr. Harmon, who, you know, spends so much time on turfgrass diseases, you know, hates turfgrass. That just doesn't seem to make any sense to me. But yes, we do have some of that. And we do have these sleuthing people in the HOAs who will come back with a lot of questions like, oh, well, we should use this grass that stays green all 4 seasons long in every state in the entire country. And of course, that particular product is annual ryegrass, you know, has a lot of annual ryegrass. So there's an education involved in that. And it's just something we deal with. So how do the association boards respond? They respond with, you know, some become really proactive, some have a hands-off approach, and others really have a hybrid approach to it all. And last thing I just want to mention is, this is a problem not only in homeowners associations, but for individual residents. And that is really the hardest group to reach with the education. I've gone out, I've done presentations in municipalities that are hard hit, like Wellington, but it's really hard to you know, reach the individuals. We do have the website in Palm Beach County and all of that, but there are also language barriers with people who hire, you know, individuals based on, you know, and they're going from property to property, but perhaps they speak Spanish or Creole, and homeowners do not speak Spanish or Creole, or the individual who are doing the lawn maintenance don't speak the language. So that also becomes a huge issue, as is individual people taking their mowers around the county, and maybe we haven't reached all of them out there. So we do some Spanish language education, but again, that is really a huge and real issue for us. So for everybody in the industry, the sod producers, for the landscapers who are working for this, certainly for Dr. Harmon and the other IFAS researchers, I just want to say thank you for all your support and help, because you know, this is a huge issue for people in my county.
Well, thank you, Lori. I wanted to introduce one more of our panelists today. Dr. Henry Meyer is a commercial urban horticultural extension agent too in Miami-Dade County. He's been there since 2003. He's a board member of the Miami-Dade Landscape Inspectors Association and has conducted numerous workshops for the commercial landscape industry on tree maintenance, BMPs, tree pruning, plant installation, and plant selection. So Henry is actually going to moderate our Q&A. I let Lori go a little bit longer. We've only got one question in the queue. So I see where Bill Shaw has indicated that he wants to answer, but I'm going to let Henry take over this little portion, and go ahead, Henry.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, there is a question here about the mosaic disease in residential lawn. What is the next step for the homeowner point of view? I think Bill Shaw, do you want to answer that? I don't know if Bill is over there.
Can you repeat that,
they have the mosaic problem. So what is the next step for him or her?
Yeah, well, as Dr. Harmon had pointed out, there's mosaic and then there's lethal viral necrosis. So assuming that that's Floratam that they've got, which is the one that we currently believe, at least so far, is the only one that's affected, then they're going to need to replace their lawn at some point. So depending on the resources they've got to commit to it and so on, I would generally advise them, to maybe maintain it as long as they can. It's acceptable if they want to wait or hold off, but to start thinking about how they're going to replace that lawn, what they're going to put in there. Maybe I might touch on what their options are if they want to go with, a St. Augustine cultivar or something else. Let's say they choose zoysia grass, and here's what you need to do to manage zoysia grass should you replace it with that, and so on. Part of the dynamic here is that folks have been waiting for Citra Blue too, for the research to be completed on that and we'll hear more about that particular cultivar later on too, but there's a lot of excitement about that. So if they can hold off, then they may want to do that too, until that's ready to go.
Okay, aquí we have another question, but this is a piggyback over there. Has Palmetto or Citra Blue shown any signs of lethal virus necrosis? I think that we're going to cover this in the future, but you want to give it an update?
You want Dr. Harmon to do that?
Yeah, so the question was about Citra Blue and Palmetto, is that correct?
Yep. Yep.
Okay, so we've inoculated Citra Blue in the greenhouse. It did not develop lethal viral necrosis symptoms. Dr. Kenworthy, I think, is going to talk about some field demonstration trials in affected communities in Palm Beach County. I have been down to look at those. He has been down. Bill and Lori have helped us looking at those trials where we've installed Citra Blue next to Palmetto and Floratam. There is lethal viral necrosis in Floratam in those trials and in surrounding lawns, and we have not seen it in the Citra Blue or the Palmetto to this point. Citra Blue is still under investigation. We'd like to have additional data, additional time, and observations to be made. Dr. Kenworthy has collected individual stolen samples from some of these locations that had LVN and mixed grasses to make sure that what we're seeing that has the lethal viral necrosis is the Floratam genotype and not Citra Blue or Palmetto. So far, in my research and in my samples that I've received, Floratam is the one that does develop the lethal viral necrosis, and these others can have symptoms, certainly of other diseases. We can have issues, fungal disease on Palmetto and Citra Blue and Floratam all can occur that can look similar. Rust is one of those, and I think Dr. Gazis is going to talk a little bit more about symptoms and some of the lookalikes. But yeah, it's so far that's what we have. Of course, with new varieties, with Citra Blue, we have some data. There are other varieties recently hitting the market that we'll talk about today that we don't have any data on, that need some additional research before we can recommend those. At this point, it's Floratam that's been confirmed and we know is the primary problem grass for lethal viral necrosis, and there may be others in the future. But right now, that's one of the reasons our recommendations are so limited to Palmetto at this point, is that one we have good observation, experimental inoculation data to back that up.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Harmon. I heard you mention Dr. Kenworthy several times, so let's go ahead and hear from him next. So Dr. Kevin Kenworthy is professor of plant breeding and molecular genetics for the Department of Agronomy at the University of Florida. His expertise is the improvement of warm season turf grasses with a focus on reducing irrigation needs of grasses used for lawns and sports turf. So without further ado, here's Dr. Kenworthy.
Hello, everyone. Mark, which screen is showing? Do I have the right one showing?
No, you need to put in presentation mode. There you go.
Okay, everyone. Hello. Today, I'm going to talk to you about genetic challenges and certification. This is with respect to St. Augustine grass. Before we get into that, let's all remember that we have a long history of St. Augustine grass use in Florida. In fact, some of the cultivars that are still in use today have been around a really long time. And in fact, Bitter Blue has been around for almost 90 years. Floratam has been around for close to 50 years now, and we're very fortunate to have two new varieties recently enter the market, those being Provista and Citra Blue. Having more options in the market is good for diversity and helps the market to grow and expand. So on with genetic challenges. St. Augustine grass is produced as sod. There's no seed that can be purchased or available. And if we look at these sod fields of St. Augustine grass, we see these ribbons that are left because St. Augustine grass doesn't have underground stems. It recovers or regenerates from stolons. And this is very simply an example of vegetative or clonal reproduction. And so every plant in a sod field of a particular cultivar should be genetically identical due to vegetative reproduction. So in that context, why do we have genetic challenges? How, if a field is clonally reproduced, does contamination occur? So I like to focus on the right part of the slide here with the seed heads. And this upper picture is a typical St. Augustine grass seed head that we should all, I assume, are familiar with, have seen. And St. Augustine grass doesn't put up a big showy seed head like Bahia grass, but it does produce seed heads down near the canopy, sometimes within the canopy, and you may not see them. So this entire structure is called a spike. And then these structures here that you may think of as a seed, this is a spikelet. Within that are florets, the floral structures of a grass seed head. And then the close-up down below is a seed head that is in flower. The florets are in bloom. And here we have the male flower or the anther and the female flower or the stigma. It's this feathery structure here. So the anthers dehisce pollen, which fall on the stigmas and fertilize the plant. If this happens to be a fertile St. Augustine grass cultivar, a seed could form. Within St. Augustine grass, we'll have two broad morphotypes that I'll discuss. You could get much more specific than this, but I'm going to use the terms diploids and polyploids, and these have to do with chromosome numbers. You may be familiar with terms such as dwarf or semi-dwarfs that I'm using to associate with diploids. Now, if we look at the cultivars down here, we don't tend to think of Raleigh as a dwarf or semi-dwarf, but it is a diploid, so it's included in here. The point is that diploids tend to be fertile and produce seed, and the non-diploids, we'll just lump them into polyploids, and that would be Bitter Blue, Floratam, Provista, Citra Blue. They tend to have poor fertility or low or no seed set. So we're going to explain this a little bit more. So diploids have a total of 18 chromosomes. Again, the term diploid is a reference to the number of sets of chromosomes. We have a total of 18 in diploid St. Augustine grass. We don't have 18 different chromosomes. We have 9 different chromosomes and 2 sets of those. So I'm going to show one set of 9 here, and I'm just very simply using numbers to represent the different chromosomes. We could make this much at several different levels of advancement, but we're going to keep it very straightforward. And now we have a second set of 9 chromosomes. So what we have here are 2 sets of chromosome 1, 2 sets of chromosome 2, so on and so forth, so that we have 2 sets of 9. And so we have, in terms of cell division or meiosis to produce gametes, the 2 chromosome 1s, which are identical chromosomes, except that they may have different forms of the genes. They have the same genes, but maybe different forms. So that's why they're different colors, to help you realize they may have different forms of the same genes. And so in cell division, the two chromosome 1s would pair and then they would divide for gamete production. The two chromosome 2s would pair and divide for gamete production, and so on and so forth. And the way these things would separate are at random from one another. So that means that a gamete or an egg or pollen cell will only have one set of 9. And a gamete will have random combinations of the parent's chromosome. And so we're showing a potential gamete that could have formed from the female flower and a potential gamete that could have formed from the male flower. And you see that these are essential mosaics of the parental combination, but each gamete has a set of 9, one set of 9. Gametes unite to form a new diploid St. Augustine plant with 18 chromosomes. So because this process works very smoothly in diploids, they are fertile. If we think about the polyploids now, specifically a triploid, will have 27 chromosomes or 3 sets of 9. One of the points to make back here with diploids is that we have an even number of sets. So those sets can pair up and divide very easily. If we have an odd number of sets, these can't pair up and divide evenly. So you can imagine that gamete formation will be a significant struggle in a triploid, and so fertility of a triploid is much lower. If we had a tetraploid, there would be 36 chromosomes with 4 sets of 9 chromosomes. We do have an even number of sets here. Chromosomes could pair and divide, and perhaps this plant could be fertile, but we don't have any tetraploids on the market, so it's somewhat irrelevant. The other polyploids, Floratam, Provista, and Citra Blue, actually have chromosome numbers that are in between triploid and tetraploid. For instance, Floratam has 32 chromosomes. So if we look at what a tetraploid might look at, and then we remove 4 chromosomes, we have a hypothetical case here for what might be the chromosome makeup in Floratam. We actually don't know. This is just hypothetical. What you see here is that we have 2 sets with 9 and 2 sets that are each missing 2 chromosomes. And you can imagine, as we try to form a gamete that's a mosaic of all of these, we may not have a correct gamete form, so there would be low fertility of these as well. So this was a long, drawn-out explanation to show you why diploids are fertile and these polyploids have reduced fertility. And again, a long, drawn-out explanation to provide some substantiation for why there may be contamination in sod fields. This happens to be a Floratam stolen, and it's a Floratam sod field that's contaminated with a diploid plant. You can see the finer leaves, shorter internodes, very characteristic of what we would refer to as a dwarf or semi-dwarf. And so that could have been from seed that came over from equipment or seed that was dropped by a bird or other animal, any numerous means. In fact, contamination is really not something that we can completely prevent, but hopefully we could delay using frequent mowing or mowing short enough to remove seed heads, barriers between fields, and cleaning of equipment. In terms of the genetic analysis, Dr. Harmon referred to several samples that were collected in Boynton Beach in early 2020. And these were off of sites where LVN was infecting the landscapes. Most of these were sites that had been replanted and were subsequently failing. We also collected sites where the Floratam had been replanted and the plants were living, or the replaced grass was living and looked well. In all, we had 33 single stolen samples collected from these lawns. Again, some of the samples had LVN, even though it was regrassed with something that was supposed to be resistant to LVN. LVN was present, and some samples were LVN free. All samples we brought back to Gainesville, and my lab coordinator, Jamie Buellman, ran DNA markers on these. All samples with LVN turned out to be Floratam. So even though a different grass was the intended purchase and replacement in the landscape, that ended up not being the case. So And in fact, in every case where we saw LVN, it turned out to be Floratam. This includes includes lawns intended to be planted with another cultivar. The frequent mistake that was occurring here was the intended cultivar was supposed to be bitter blue, but turned out to be Floratam. Other things we've done, we've worked with sod growers to try to assess whether or not the virus is present on their farm. 16 farms have voluntarily submitted samples, and we have tested for the presence of sugarcane mosaic virus. And to date, we have not detected any sugarcane mosaic virus on any of the sod farms that have worked with us through this process. I think that should be comforting for consumers out there. And so with cultivars, kind of where are we? So there are these 8 cultivars that are available for purchase in the state. Again, Raleigh is only available in the Panhandle, so it's really not that relevant for LVN discussions, but it needs to be listed. So when it comes to LVN replacement options to date, we're at Seville, Classic, and Palmetto as those options that are out there suitable for replacement of Floratam in LVN affected landscapes. We formerly recommended bitter blue, but because of the frequency of individuals who purchased bitter blue, that subsequent failure, and that ending up being documented that the failed replaced grass was actually Floratam. Because of the frequency of that occurring, we've taken bitter blue off of this replacement list. Maybe it can come back in the future, and perhaps in the future we'll be able to add Provista and Citra Blue to this list. They are both under evaluations in LVN affected sites, but we need more time to be certain about how these new grasses on the market are performing with respect to LVN. With respect to certification, certification is a law-abiding process authorized by the Federal Seed Act, administered by the Association of Official Seed Certification Agencies, AOSCA. In Florida and Alabama, the Southern Seed Certification Association is the recognized seed certification agency. And this gives us 4 classes of certified sod: breeder's sod, foundation sod, registered sod, and certified sod, each coming with their associated colored tag that designates their level. How does this process of certification work? Someone may develop a new cultivar, and then they would create a breeder's field of that. And generally the breeder takes care of that, and then use the breeder's field would be harvested to plant a foundation field. That foundation field, at least when it comes to UF released products, is under the direction of Florida Foundation Seed, which may work with licensed producers. From foundation, that sod would be harvested to plant an expanded registered field with licensed producers. Those licensed producers could then take that registered field and plant a certified field, again, only with licensed producers. So this is a process of ownership through this, and it is legally binding, and there are inspections that occur through this process. So fields are fumigated, or there's an alternative method to fumigation prior to initial planting. The different classes can be planted based on the need or designation based on the SSCA inspection. And inspections are based on isolation, weed pressure, and genetic integrity. Fields must be approved before harvest, and shipment of sod should contain appropriate certificate depending on that class. So where does that leave us with these cultivars that are on the market, and how can we ensure genetic purity? There's nothing in place to oversee the genetic purity of Floratam, bitter blue, Seville, or Raleigh. In the case of Palmetto, those programs will be covered later in the webinar. For classic St. Augustine grass, the owners do maintain fumigated fields to ensure genetic purity, although there is no licensing program. For Provista, there is a licensing program, and the fact that it's glyphosate resistant should prevent contamination from other cultivars, ensuring genetic purity. Citra Blue is the only of these that follows the certification protocol. However, there is an important caveat in that production fields or sod sold to consumers are not a certified class, but they are required to have been planted from a certified class of sod. So if we look at the consumer down here, they're going to receive sod from a production field of Citra Blue. That production field must be planted from either foundation, registered, or certified, and it would have that inspection go along with it from Southern Seed Certification Association. So there is a nice chain of command of ensuring genetic purity that goes into any square foot of Citra Blue that would be sold to a consumer. And that's all I have. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Kenworthy. We're going to go ahead and move into our next section. We actually have two speakers in this area. So our first speaker is going to be Ms. Betsy Mcgill, who's the Executive Director of the Turfgrass Producers of Florida, which is a nonprofit association representing growers and allied professionals statewide since 1989. So go ahead, Betsy, please.
Super. Thank you so much. And we're going to get into our presentation mode. Thank you so much for being part of this and for everyone who's worked with us on this issue. We have been involved for a long time because we're deeply concerned about it, and we're glad for the opportunity to give you a little more information from a farm level. Certification, as Kevin pointed out, is a confusing term in our industry. It actually refers to a couple of different scenarios. Certification can provide genetic assurance, assurance of genetic purity to the extent it's possible, given the knowledge that we can't exactly put barriers up for birds if they decide to move some seed. But those things are typically taken care of by spot spraying and frequent inspections. Certification does not typically extend to lawn or common area use grasses, because the type of certification that extends to those fields that are harvested for sale is generally reserved for golf courses and sports type grasses, because they are looking for a specific performance criteria. Think about how a ball takes off from a tee box, or how it rolls on a fairway, or how it responds to wear tolerance on a soccer field or a polo field. There's a reason that they're looking for a certain thing in Raymond James Stadium, or when you're playing the World Series. So they're wanting it to do a certain thing. Lawn grasses aren't subject to that same kind of performance. And therefore, the certification doesn't typically extend to a production field in that sense. What does extend to production fields in issues like Citra Blue is the fact that all of those grasses, such as Citra Blue, palmetto, anything that is typically a patented grass or has been a trademarked or under that sort of program, will have to be taken from a starter field that is certified in that way. So they know for sure that if I plant a field of Citra Blue, I've taken my planting stock from an area that inspectors have said is Citra Blue. So a certified sod to go on a golf course is not exactly the same as saying, I want to be sure what I'm buying for my lawn is Citra Blue or palmetto or something of that, or Pro Vista. Certification also does not address diseases or syndromes like LVN. So saying that you've got a certified field is not saying that anyone has come in and certified it being disease-free from LVN at this time. And right now, without a certainty of what cultivars we'd even be looking at, we wouldn't even know what to certify there. One of the questions that we get a lot is, well, why can't I just buy certified Floratam? There actually was a certified Floratam program that went through that whole long process. And there were fields that were set aside as certified Floratam for whenever anybody wanted them. The problem was nobody did. Why? Well, it goes back to that specific performance criteria. It goes to the nature of lawn grasses, and it goes to the history of Floratam itself. It has been in the market a very long time. The patent has expired on that. And that meant that anyone could produce Floratam. Because anyone could produce Floratam without having to go through those levels of certification, the acreage expanded significantly. It was wide availability, and it gave you intense price competition. So you'll find that Floratam is everywhere. There's a lot of it. Price is going to vary. That going through the whole certification process, fumigating the land before pre-planting, setting aside certain things that were only for certified purchasers did not add value in that instance. So there is a way to get good Floratam. Doesn't mean that it's not responsibly produced or checked for weeds or sourced appropriately and that it's not good quality. It just means when you're asking for a certified grass, you have to know what you're looking for. What it does mean is sourcing matters. So the quality of production can vary significantly. So given all of that, yes, who cares? Who even cares about certification? Well, as I said, historically, not everyone in the St. Augustine realm. And why? Well, because most St. Augustines could do well in a lot of Florida applications, soil types, climate differentiations, the different places that you put it. It was simply what the British gardening shows, you'll hear them refer to as a good doer. It just does well in most situations. It is difficult to tell cultivars apart. So you didn't have customers who were specifically asking for certain things. Specifiers are very general. They'll often say, get me St. Augustine, some kind. They may say, oh, I'd like a shade tolerant or something like that. But very often what we get is very general requests, and it is very often price driven. Specifiers rarely understand the difference in cultivars, and your clients are going to understand that even less. And the other thing we face is landscapers, as you guys know, you need it yesterday. You've got a job waiting. You've got to get that down. You need your certificate of occupancy. So a lot of times what we get is, give me whatever you got. What can you get? Or what's the cheapest? If you look at the photos on your screen, when you try to look at a leaf blade between, say, these two Floratam cultivars at the bottom, we can look at it and we can go, oh, palmetto, that's yellow-green. You look at the Citra Blue and you go, well, that's blue-green. Most people aren't going to see that. You look at the top, and this is actually from a lawn installation where the maintenance company was concerned that there were mixed cultivars, and it was a dwarf, semi-dwarf with what appeared to be a regular Floratam. So there was that height difference, and the mowing regimens were not the same. We go down to something like the stolen color. You can see that the one at the top has your more purple stolen, and the one at the bottom has a green stolen. So same lawn. And that just simply to say it's difficult for us to go out and look at a yard and go, oh, this is what you've got. Supply chain has a big impact on what's going into lawns. And any one of you who work with this will know that. There's several levels that a load of sod could go through. So tracing it is not always easy. It becomes an issue in Lvn impacted areas. Right now we've got high demand, we've got limited inventory, and you come for a sod specified to give me something and it's not available. So you go, well, what do you got? Just give me anything you got. Quality sometimes can secondary to price. You go, well, let me shop around. Let me call anybody and see who's got something. I'll just take it. Maybe you don't have a job site ready. You're ready to put it in that day and they're like, no, had a problem. Can't do this. And you go, fine, I'll just take this load to somewhere else. So that load could have been destined for a certain spot, end up somewhere else. Maybe you've got a pallet or two left over. You don't want to waste that. So you start mixing it on to the next installation. I had a gentleman call with a mixed cultivar situation. Part of his lawn had been put in 1 week, and it was 2 weeks later before the other side was. And he's trying to figure out why they look different. And in the end, it had come from different farms and actually ended up being different cultivars. In his case, he was pretty finicky. He noticed that, sent me about 18 pictures. And so it mattered to him, he could tell. When it becomes a problem is when you're looking for something specific to replace a lawn that has been killed with LVN. And you're saying, I've got $3 million worth of sod I want to put down. I want to be sure I do this right. It's the right cultivar, it's the same thing. So that's when it starts to make a difference. So in this scenario, I know that my part of the agenda said something like potential solutions. I wish I could give you a great, easy solution to this, but as you see, it's a complex issue and the science is still evolving. But a few thoughts that we had is, if you're an extension, what do? Well, I'm not going to begin to say I know more than Bill and Lori, and I'm tickled they're here because mine is very general. Just to say, keep up with the latest from both Phil and Kevin. If you have questions, please check with them. Bill and Lori are great resources. So is Henry. These are guys with boots on the ground and they've seen it. Be cautious when you start recommending cultivars. Again, check back with UF, see what's the latest and what the progress is, and obviously stay up to date with the research. If you are a farm member and you're a farmer and you're looking at this saying, what do I do? Obviously cultivars are important. You can send in samples for testing to Kevin. He is working with that to get some genetic ideas. If you go, I'm not sure what I've got, I'd like to know, contact Kevin. We can get some samples in and get you an idea of at least what it's not, maybe, or that we know what it is. Because it's not been detected in the sod fields, you may want to watch out for, as Phil said, moist sap, things coming in potentially. Less of a problem if you've got a truck that's traveled, but if you're kind of close, you may want to look at things like not letting those truck drivers sweep out in your field or loading away from your production fields. It reminds me very much of when I was in the citrus industry when we first started with canker and the protocols that were put in place for that. So it's kind of in some ways a common sense thing. If you know you've got trucks or customers coming in and out of an affected area, you may want to look at the possibility, however remote, that there could be some contamination. Be sure that you are educated about this disease, the progression, the recommended cultivars, stay up to date. And the biggest is if you're a landscaper or if you're in lawn care, understand that at present Floratam is still appropriate for areas where LVN has not been reported. It is not dead. It is not out of the market. There's still very good Floratam out there, but establish a relationship with a farm that is reputable and don't shop on price alone. Educate yourself. Know what cultivar should look like, know what should be out there and where. If you're looking for something specific, floridaturf.com gives you a listing of our farms and turf types. You can search by either a geographic area or for something specific you're looking for. Especially if you're working in an LVN impacted area, you need to understand what you're looking for and make sure that to the best extent you can, you're getting what you think you're getting. Educate your clients so they understand why a grass would be different in price. A patented grass, a grass that is still under a release agreement, a licensing agreement that's trademarked, is going to have a royalty on it. Your Pro Vista, Citra Blue, Palmetto are just a few. They're going to be a little more expensive. It pays to understand why and to be able to educate your clients on why it is worth it. Verify what you hear. I have heard some really wild and crazy things, as Lori alluded to, about the virus and gosh, did the best was, did UF create this? They're just saying it's a problem because they're going to sell a lot of their own sod. No, it's not practical, not what we're in the business for. These are guys, professional reputations, and that's just not happening. Avoid mix and loads to the extent that you can when you're working in an LVN impacted area. Brian will certainly probably address this as well. Stay up to date on the research with the virus. And for goodness sake, when someone tells you, oh, that's fine, we're selling certified virus-free sod, I can get you that, run. There is no such thing. You can visit us at floridaturf.com. We have news events. You can find a farm. You can search for a turf type. And of course, you can become a member if you want to keep up with us, the work we're doing on a farm level, or as an associate member if you're a landscaper and installer, if you're in lawn care, anything to do with the turf industry. That just keeps you in the loop on what we're doing, and we'll provide resources and help and connections for you. So unless there's questions, thanks. We appreciate the chance to talk with you.
Thank you, Betsy. Our next speaker is Erin Wilder. She has been with Sod Solutions for the last 15 years and is the Executive Director of Business and Professional Development. She serves as Territory Manager for both the West Coast and the Gulf Coast of the United States. And Erin also manages the Sod Solutions Professionals Division, which helps turfgrass professionals select, specify, purchase, and maintain Sod Solutions premium turfgrass brands. So I'm going to hand it over to Erin.
Okay. Are you seeing the correct screen, Mark?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mark. So my name is Erin Wilder, as Mark mentioned, and I live in Tallahassee. I manage our several territories and our professional side. I am a former board member with the previous the Florida Suggers Cough, the turfgrass producers of Florida, and a past president of the Florida Turfgrass Association. So I want to talk a little bit about guaranteeing you're getting Palmetto St. Augustine. That is one of our varieties that we manage. We also manage the Citra Blue, but Palmetto has been known for its shade tolerance and cold tolerance. But one of the biggest things is what each of your speakers has spoke on, is that it is one of the main recommendations for LVN resistance. And so it is exclusively managed by Sod Solutions for genetic purity, and it's grown on sod farms that have been vetted for quality, control, and consistency. So you know that you're getting Palmetto when you're going through one of our licensed producers. And that's the biggest thing that we want to help you determine your source of supplier for Palmetto St. Augustine. This is a list of our growers that are in Central and South Florida. So you can see there's a lot of options in the area. If you're looking to get Palmetto, you can go directly to one of our growers. The other option is to also go to what we've worked with our partners on, our authorized distributors. Another opportunity is we have provided flags to some of our growers, and we'll continue to provide flags to any of our licensed producers. But the biggest thing is to look for that Sod Solutions stamp, and that actually shows that they are a licensed producer. So they're not selling you something that is shade grass, they are actually selling you Palmetto St. Augustine. Another option, if you're going on and you're a homeowner, or you're in a residential market, or you've got a client that is a homeowner looking to buy, you can go direct to the sodsolutions.com website and you can order directly online. That ensures that that is being provided by a licensed producer that Sod Solutions will help manage with you. For the professional level, we actually have a professional level opportunity as well called sodsolutionspro.com. And so we will work with HOAs, landscapers, we work with sports and golf as well to really ensure that they're going out and getting the grass they want. So if the decision is to install Palmetto St. Augustine or Citra Blue for that matter, you can come directly to Sod Solutions Pro to get a quote and be assured that you're getting the grass that you want to get. So that kind of wraps up what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to just reiterate Betsy's comments on the certification program and Kevin's comments on the certification. Palmetto is under the guidelines of Sod Solutions. So we test for the genetic purity, and then the certification of the Citra Blue production fields, that is for their plant stock production. So if you're an end user, we try to avoid the terminology of certification in the realm of residential commercial landscapes. On the golf and sports side, it is very much a common term that we use, but not on the residential and the commercial landscape. If you have any questions, you can reach out to us directly. We'll be happy to help navigate any of your requests for you and assure that you're getting what you asked for. If you ordered some grass and you just want to verify it with us, you can submit that verification to us and we will help navigate that with you. So thank you, Mark. I'll turn it back over to you. Hope that caught us up some.
Thank you, Erin. So Henry, I do see there's one question. We're scheduled for a Q&A break right now. So if you want to handle that.
Yeah, there is one here. Early in the program, it was stated that all samples testing positive for LVN also test positive for Sugarcane Mosaic. However, once the Sugarcane Mosaic is present, will it inevitably progress to LVN? If not, if there is any way to predict the future for lawns with sugarcane only?
Yeah, I think I'll take a stab at that one, Henry. The Sugarcane Mosaic Virus in Floratam will progress to lethal viral necrosis over time. The Sugarcane Mosaic Virus in other varieties so far has progressed to Mosaic and then stops and does not progress to the point where it kills the other varieties that we've tested. We're testing additional new varieties as well, but at this point, there's no way to stop Sugarcane Mosaic Virus in Floratam from this particular strain that we found that causes LVN is out there where it occurs in Floratam. It has caused lethal viral necrosis, and we haven't been able to stop that. That same virus in other varieties does not kill those other varieties. It stops at Mosaic.
Thanks. There's another one. What is the scientific explanation for why Provista could be potentially resistant if it is derived from Floratam?
So with Provista, we don't know what the response is going to be. Dr. Kenworthy has worked with Scott's a little bit on that. Did you have something you wanted to add there, Kevin?
Sure, I think it's a great question. You know, Provista is derived from Floratam, so there might be an automatic association. So Provista is a genetically modified turfgrass. It has an insertion of 2 genes, but when you go through a genetic modification like that, you're not only inserting genes at random places in the genomes, which may cause other genetic changes, you're also going through a tissue culture process, which can cause other genetic changes. So there actually is potential that Provista could be that Provista is not susceptible to LVN, just simply because there are other random changes that can occur. I think if you look at a Floratam plant next to a Provista plant, you can easily see that they look quite a bit different. So, and some of the and those differences can be attributed to some of the other undirected genetic modifications that occurred along with the directed modifications. So, hope that helps.
Yeah, me too. I don't have any more question here. Mark, repetition is key here. So the link for this webinar will be distributed after, correct?
That is correct. Yes, after the presentation, we'll be emailing a link out to all the attendees today. So,
Perfect.
All right. Well, thank you for those questions and those answers. Our next speaker is Romina Gassis. She is the Assistant Professor of Plant Pathology at the UF Tropical Research and Education Center in Homestead, Florida. She also serves as the Director of the Plant Diagnostic Clinic at that location, and one of her current projects is evaluating sugarcane mosaic incidents on St. Augustine grass in Miami-Dade County. So,
hi,
go ahead, Romina.
Can you all hear me? And the
Yes.
screen is correct? Good. So thank you for staying. And I'm basically gonna talk about how to identify the disease in the field and how to submit a sample and, you know, be sure that you have that disease in your lawn. So as it was mentioned, I am the director of the Plant Disease Clinic in South Miami. We serve several crops and communities, but mainly I'm gonna focus on turf. Most of the samples that we get are either directly from homeowners or from pest control and landscape companies. So something is worth to mention that we know that we had this problem in South Florida, and I'm talking about Miami-Dade County, Monroe, Broward, and few years ago, but lately in the last couple of years, the number of samples submitted for diagnosis has really increased dramatically, and also the proportion of these samples being positive for the virus. Okay, so Lori was talking about the outbreak in the epidemics in Palm Beach County. I think this is where we are heading, and that's a little bit worrisome for us, but at least we can leverage in a lot of the information that other counties have gathered. So symptoms, the classic symptom that Phil also referred multiple times is this mosaic symptom, this patchy distribution of the chlorotic areas on the leaf blade, and of course is called mosaic because of this resemblance to the tiles that are arranged in a mosaic form. Now, at the beginning, the plant develops general chlorosis, and often mosaic, even though you can find exemptions on the leaves, and these yellow streaks that go along the veins. You can clearly see on this very beautiful blade. This is a perfect sample, right? Like textbook sample. I'm gonna show you later how real samples look in the field. And so in some cases, you will see a purple hue at the tip of the blades. And that's also sometimes common, sometimes not so much. And so something very important to remember is that symptoms are temperature dependent. And as Phil have shown through his research, when the plants are kept at a nice warm temperature, you will have these mosaic symptoms on the blades. They can progress into more mosaic and more chlorosis, but you won't get necrosis until the temperature goes down and below 65, 64 and below. So you can see that the areas where the chlorotic spots were have become necrotic. And then you get the dieback of the leaf blade. Now, this is important to remember because when you are looking for the classic symptoms that can guide you, your sampling, don't let it go too far, right? Because when you have extensive necrosis, then there is no really green tissue to look for mosaic symptoms. Also, these are part of field research, and this is showing you how the disease progresses and how the symptoms change and become more severe with the reduced temperature. So let's say that the infection happened during the summer and you get all these mosaic symptoms. As the season progresses, as a year progresses and the temperature goes below 65, you're going to start seeing these necrotic patches on these leaf blades all the way until you get dieback and death of the lawn, right? And, you know, we are in South Florida, or I am in South Florida. And even though it is warmer than you guys up north, we do get a lot of days during December, January, and February with cold temperatures, right? Cold temperatures for a tropical or subtropical lawn. So this is just a calendar showing you how many days in 2020 we had temperatures that can induce and are conducive for lethal viral necrosis symptoms to appear. So there are consecutive days of cold temperatures, and coincidentally, and it makes sense, these are the times that we get more samples at the clinic and that people kind of freak out, right? Because one thing is seeing your lawn a little yellow and other thing is seeing your lawn necrotic, right? People really get concerned, and that's when they rush to the clinic to submit their samples. So there are other organisms that can cause leaf spots. And this is one example that is pretty common. I think it's more common in northern counties than in our county, but we do see this organism causing leaf spots. Now, if you really look close, they don't look like the mosaic or the necrotic patches of LVN. However, for a non-trained eye and from far away, it could, you know, be confusing with some spots, but some of the symptoms of LVN. Turf rust, I think, in my opinion, is a disease that can be more confusing with the mosaic and even the necrotic patches that you see with LVN. So especially when the lesions are not sporulating, when the rust fungus is not sporulating, that you will be more able to distinguish. You could see in this case, and when a lawn is a little bit dry, it's very confusing to me and to clients on, is this symptoms or LVN or is this rust? So this can be one of the confusions. Now, how does the disease looks in the field? And these are very, very good pictures of a lawn infected with LVN. And you can see how widespread, almost uniform, the death of the lawn is. Not in every case looks like that. This is a very advanced case of LVN positive lawn. It's widespread yellowing and death. And this is because the lawn is connected, right? All that the grass and the grass is connected. So once you have an infection on one side, it will rapidly spread throughout. So that's where you get these homogeneous symptoms. Now, a very good clue is whenever you see a lawn that has the death of the grass really follows the track marks of a mower, right? And it is because it has been shown that a way of spreading the disease is through the tires, right? That they will break the blades and the sap is gonna come out and it's wet and moist. So it's easier to transfer it to the other part of the lawn. So that's a very good clue that the lawn is infected with LVN or with the virus that causes LVN. Now, brown patch is very common in South Florida, one of the most common fungal diseases that we have here on St. Augustine. And it has a very different pattern, right, in the field. So if you see here, it creates these patches, reason why it's called large patch. And so just compare it with how I showed you before, how LVN infected lawns look. Take-all root rot, also very common, even though this year it hasn't been as severe or it had low incidence. But again, it causes these irregular patches, and you can see kind of the melting, right, of the grass. And when you uproot the grass, you can see the necrotic roots and the decay and of the root system. So a very different organism. So pay attention when you see the kind of like the big picture of the symptoms in the field. Now, the second step to identify that you have an infected lawn is to take a sample. Not all samples are going to look as nice as the one here. These are kind of the perfect sample, right? You have the mosaic there, you have enough green tissue to test, very clear symptoms of the disease. More often, samples will look like this. As I told you, when the temperature goes down, is when the homeowners or when the landscapers are worried that they need to solve the problem, so they come to the clinic. So this is how it mostly looks. You have the mosaic, which is good, but you also will have some of the dieback and some of the necrosis. Some turfs are also infected with other diseases, root diseases, for instance, so you can have two diseases happening at the same time, right? And this is the case of one sample that had, I believe this was brown patch, and then it also had the mosaic, right? Mostly people now that know more about the disease and you know, we have done a lot of workshops, they are very worried about the mosaic and not so much worried about the root issues. So how do we diagnose this disease? Unfortunately, viral diseases are complicated to diagnose. They are not as easy as fungal diseases that we can culture them. We can look at the microscope. They have some characters that can help us in the identification. Viruses, very small. We don't have an electron microscope at the clinic, so we can rely on that system. So the first step is to look for symptomatic grass in the landscape, right? And one thing that it was mentioned before in previous talks is that the lawn can be a mix of cultivars, and it can also be weed, right? And you know, I'm not a turf expert, and people are not turf expert. So I have gotten samples where the weed is the only thing that remains alive in the sample, right? So look for a place that has the cultivar that you were supposed to have in your lawn and that is not dead. These are good samples, enough green tissue for several tests, right? Because we repeat the test multiple times. If it's not positive for the virus, we also look at the roots and try to find a reason why the lawn is declining. These are examples of bad samples. These are real samples that come to the clinic, okay? I'm not making this up. Sometimes we just get really a mush of grass. Sometimes we get soil and just few blades, right? So there's nothing we can do. I can look at the roots and maybe find something, but you know, our accuracy really decreases with the state of the sample. Now, sometimes people collect a sample like this for several reasons. And sometimes they collect a good sample, but they put it in the back of their truck under the sun, or they send it by mail and it takes 10 days. You know, there's multiple reasons why a sample like that will arrive at the clinic. Once you decide to submit a sample, very important to fill the form. We do need to keep track of the locations of these positive samples. That is good for us, good for everybody. Please let us know the variety, because at least I am not expert in, if you tell me it's Floratam, I will believe that it's Floratam, unless it looks like super different, right? So please try to fill the form as much as you can. Field photos are very welcome. And this is a very good example of these ladies adding the pictures to their submission. You can send them printed or you can send them by email. This is really helpful for us. The sample stayed not so good, right? But we were able to get some living tissue from that sample. So there's two common ways of diagnosing this disease that doesn't require DNA analysis or next generation techniques, which are more sophisticated. But in plant clinics, we do two techniques. They are both commercially available kits, so you could buy them if you want for your own lab. The first one, they're both serological tests, so they both are looking for the antigen present in the virus that is present in the grass. One takes 30 minutes, the other one can take up to 2 days. Not of continuous work, but it needs some sample preparation, so that's the reason it's time consuming. One is more expensive than the other one. The important thing is that with the immunostrip that takes 30 minutes, it's good for symptomatic grass. If you have an asymptomatic grass that you think is infected with Sugarcane Mosaic Virus, and that indeed is infected by a very low titer, then we might miss it with this technique. So you will have to go and ask for the ELISA test. Since since this test, the immunostrip, you can take it to the field. We're going to talk a little bit more about it. The important thing is that you need living tissue, okay? And it's basically super easy. What you do is you get a little bit of the symptomatic tissue. You use a special bag that is very strong, so it's not going to break when you macerate the tissue, and use a buffer that also comes with a kit. Then you macerate the tissue, and then you submerge the immunostrip into the solution that has, in theory, the particles of the virus swimming on the solution. And then you look at the results. Now, the results need to be read at the 30 minutes. The positive line is not going to be bright red like the control. This is the control, and they always have to be positive. If the control is not appearing, the test is invalid, okay? So you could see here the red lines for positive results. Now, this test is not going to work if you put too much plant material or if you put too little plant material. Okay, you might use, again, asymptomatic but infected tissue, and the sensitivity is not great. So if you take this to the field and then you leave these immunostrips out in the heat, they might not work any longer. You might submerge the strips too deep, and then the chlorophyll will go through the strip by capillarity, and then it's all going to look green, and that red is going to disappear. So there's several problems that you might find if you are trying to do this in the field and have no proper training. Again, you can buy this online. If you buy the kit that comes with a buffer and the bags, is $7 per test. So, you know, it's a good option for you guys that are in the field. If you don't want to go through all this trouble, you can always send samples up to Gainesville, to the turf clinic, or to the Tropical Research and Education Center Plant Disease Clinic. Again, if you are dealing with asymptomatic grass, I will suggest that you send them to Phil's Turf Clinic, which they have a little bit more samples to process, so they run ELISA more often. And with that, thank you for listening, and I'll take questions if you have.
Mark, we have 3 questions. I don't know if we have time.
Yeah, Henry, let's go ahead and let Dr. Henry speak, and then we'll do the question at the end.
Okay.
If you don't mind. That way we keep on schedule. So, all right. So our last speaker, and I'm going to remind you all, if you can, if you have any questions, go ahead and post them in the Q&A. And then after Dr. Unruh's done speaking, we'll go ahead and you have to have the panelists answer those. So our last speaker today is Dr. Brian Unruh, who's a professor of environmental horticulture at the University of Florida, IFAS, West Florida Research and Education Center in Jay. His turfgrass science program focuses on water quality and quantity, pest management, and cultivar development. Brian is recognized nationally as the authority on turf industry best management practices. And Dr. Unruh is the immediate past chair of the Crop Science Society of America's C5 division. So Dr. Unruh, please take it away.
All right. Well, I'm assuming you can hear me. And you've heard from all the really smart people that have used them great big words. And I'm going to bring it down a bit and talk a little bit about just kind of the remediation. And you've got the problem, now what? And so as we kind of bring this plane in for a landing, we'll talk about the renovation, best practices, a couple herbicide options, and then maybe some post-installation care. I think, this LVN renovation strategy really probably relates to how severe is your problem. And, we see over there on the left side, it's just thinning. And so that would, send you in a different direction. Or you see in this picture over here where it's beyond thinning, it is gone, at least in portions. And so how severe is that problem is going to dictate kind of the level of response that you're going to give it. Realizing that in time, what you see here on the left is going to get worse. And so when we think about that, part of it is a complete replacement with some new sod. Whether you stick with St. Augustine or you move to zoysia grass or some other grass, versus just plugging some of these new grasses into the existing sites that are impacted by the LVN. And so clearly the new sod is going to be the quickest option for a new lawn. It's going to be the more costly option. Plugging is going to be a little slower and it's going to be less costly, at least in the short term. And Bill mentioned that. And I think probably the biggest thing is that by doing a complete replacement of the new sod, you can fix some of the problems that need to be addressed to have, really a successful landscape. And so we look at a few of those and before we get there. So regardless to which option you go, really these 10 steps need to be taken into consideration and looking, doing a site assessment. And maybe that in part drives, we're going to do a complete renovation. We're going to go in and just plug it. If we do a complete renovation, then we've got to really clean the site up and regrade and again, fix some of those challenges. We'll look at a little bit of soil analysis, do an irrigation system audit, soil amendments if needed. And that if needed is important. Then some deep tillage, some final grading, and then planting and irrigation, and follow with some post-plant care. So when we look at some site assessments, a lot of times you've inherited some challenges, and so this is over, our favorite chicken place, and this is not LVN, this is chinch bug. This whole little strip of grass, which should have never been put there in the first place, warms up quite significantly. Chinch bugs moved in, kill this thing. But just imagine trying to maintain this little bitty strip of grass. Why didn't they just bring this plant bed out and not put a turf grass here? Think about this, and clearly this isn't LVN, it's not St. Augustine, but a lot of our landscapers, you're driving these 48, 60, 72-inch deck mowers at Mach 2, and you're trying to maintain properties that have slopes and slights and draws like this, and so you simply can't maintain this site with something as large as that. And then for whatever reason, people love their trees and they love their turf grass as well. In a situation like this, turf maybe is not the best option. And so when we do a site assessment going in and saying, okay, what do we need to address so that we can have the best and most successful new landscape post redoing. And so if we're going to go in and do a clean site, so we're going to strip the old out and we're going to put new grass in this scenario, I think it's imperative that you strip the old grass out. And it's not so much, about getting rid of all that disease material, because hopefully you're going to put something in there that's resistant. But I think it is critical to get rid of this stuff that is there and start fresh. And we do that obviously with a sod cutter. Regrading the landscape does not mean placing soil over the the top of the existing grass and weeds. It's shocking to me. Drive around, you see, they literally just brought in fill, put it over the top of this old grass, and then the semi showed up with the pallets of grass, and they started dropping it. Well, I mean, that's they get an A for effort, but here's the situation. They didn't kill anything. And so the sod shows up. You can see they've already started putting a little bit down. They're just going right over the top of all of these weeds. And so the site really should be weed free prior to sodding. again, we're wanting to make sure we're successful with the in the end game. Well, let's talk a little bit about this weed-free thing. And Lori mentioned some concerns with glyphosate. You know, some people will start quivering and shaking when you even utter the word glyphosate. So we did a little demonstration for our field day a couple years ago and looked at some glyphosate alternatives. And so Roundup Fusilade, that's this plot number 2. Cheetah Pro, which is glufosinate, which is a different chemistry than glyphosate. It is these are all considered non-selectives. Reward, which is diquat, and then some Scythe, and some these are some organic materials, Axe, Final Sand, and that's a mix of fatty acids. Green Goobler, that's a 30% vinegar or acetic acid mix. And then this Avenger AG, which is a kind of an essential oil that we're looking at. But anyway, so this is 24 hours after treatment. You can see we lit some of them up pretty good. I mean, 24 hours after treatment, we were able to see this. Well, let's come back 1 week later. We can see the glyphosate is kicked in, but most of these alternatives down here, even though they were initially pretty damaging to this St. Augustine grass turf, we had nearly complete recovery following, 1 week after treatment. And so we look at some of these things, and it really kind of comes down to cost. You know, if we think about the glyphosate plus Fusilade, you're at $2.20 per 1,000 square feet. The glufosinate, $2.41. The reward, $1.19. But look down here, this Green Goobler, $45.86 per 1,000 square feet. And the reality is it didn't kill anything. When you come back and look at this, even 1 week after treatment. Now, I want to caution you, if you're looking at the Scythe, Axe, Final Sand, Green Goobler, and the Avenger AG, the personal protective equipment, the PPE requirements of these alternatives are pretty extreme. This 30%, and you can even get 40% acetic acid on the internet. It's pretty caustic. And I am oftentimes, I've seen a lot of landscapers out, with backpack sprayers on, spraying these products with no PPE on, and because this one may come with the organic mark. A lot of people think that maybe they're not going to cause any problems, but the PPE requirement of these things is essential. Let's move on and talk a little bit about soil analysis. Take a few soil samples to determine your pre-plant needs. pH, of course, our desired range is going to be between 6.5 and 7.5. And it's in the soil test off to the lab. It's going to come back with that number. This is our target. And if it's too low, add a little lime. If it's too high, add a little bit of sulfur. And then I want to make particular attention to these two right here, phosphorus and nitrogen. Phosphorus, do not apply if this number on the soil test is greater than 10 parts per million. Now, you're going to get a little bit different information coming. That number is going to come back from the lab, but you may see a recommendation. But the turf scientists have really drilled down on this 10 parts per million number. We're pretty confident when you're putting a turf grass into the landscape with that prolific fibrous root system, that the phosphorus that we have in the soil, assuming it's over 10 parts per million, will be sufficient to support that turf grass plant. Nitrogen, never apply pre-plant. This was one of the big things that we found in 8 years of research that was conducted all over the state of Florida, was that we want to be environmental stewards, and applying a pre-plant nitrogen prior to putting the sod on the ground. And then by the time you hit it with some irrigation, you will leach those nutrients. So there's enough nitrogen in the soil. There's enough nitrogen that's going to come in on that sod. And just that disturbance process of harvesting will be sufficient for that grass to get going. 30 days in, 60 days in, monitoring the color of that new sod that's gone on the ground, you may want to then consider putting some supplemental nutrition on at that point. And then all the other nutrients, pre-plant action, really not necessary. Most of our soils are pretty robust. And again, once we have the grass down, get it growing, then we can come back and just treat those through our normal pre or post-plant applications. Irrigation uniformity is essential. Of course, this is zoysia, and zoysia grass loves to tattle on us when our irrigation system is not very uniform, but you've got to do a catch can test. I was in the irrigation business years and years ago, and it's amazing how many people they can look out on a lawn and they can see the sprinklers running and say, yep, it's good, and it's not. And in fact, this situation here, you know, when this irrigation system was installed, these shrubs were tiny. Now they're very large, and you can see the disruption from, you know, of the irrigation pattern causing tremendous problems in that irrigation. Was in downstate, and I saw this guy. So I saw this situation. So that's a picture waiting to happen. So I snapped a picture, but I noticed this guy was standing here, you know, and I'm thinking he's wondering if this is LVN right here. No, it's lack of irrigation, amongst the other problems. And so that's not LVN. So don't blame everything on LVN. Blame it on the lack of a nozzle in the sprinkler. And what about soil amendments? There's a lot of chatter out there about incorporating some soil amendments, and there's tremendous evidence that poor soils can be improved by adding a good quality compost. Most of the research that you're seeing come out of the University of Florida right now is really focused on the fact of going into our sandy soils, adding a little bit of organic matter can increase the water holding capacity of the soil. And again, tremendous evidence that this is important. So if your soils are compacted, then the amendment with a compost is a good idea. If you're less than 3% organic matter in your soil, which your soil test is going to tell you that if you request it, then you can amend it with soil. With the compost. And so I like QR codes. If you snap this little QR code right here, you'll be directed to a FDEP website. And Dr. Eben Bean at the University of Florida has just published this. Well, it came out back in October, but guidance for amending urban soils with organic amendments. And so his research that's been done. And then just last week, I believe it was, he did our Urban Landscape Summit put on by the Center for Land Use Efficiency. He spoke about all this research and how the organic amendments are making an impact. I just checked his webinar is not up yet, but usually takes about a week. So I'd expect it up by tomorrow or so on YouTube. So if you search Urban Landscape Summit on YouTube, you will see all of these videos as well. So this QR takes you to this document, and then search that YouTube channel. But bottom line is that, you know, incorporate some good quality compost, and Dr. Bean gets into some of the discussions of the different composts they've been testing. Incorporate it into about 6 inches into the soil. And again, I want to draw attention here. If your organic matter in your soil, so if you're especially in an older landscape, if it's already at, you know, bumping that 3% number of organic matter, there's no need to add that compost. You've already got sufficient organic matter in there to hold the soil moisture that's there. Plus that organic matter is going to offer tremendous nutrient mineralization over time. Rototillers are really good at finding irrigation lines and water lines, electricity lines, natural gas lines. So make sure you get those marked as well. And so make sure you get them incorporated very well. Set that tiller, you know, about 6 or 8 inches below the top of the compost. And then once you've got it all tilled in, come back and rake that site smooth. And then, you know, you want to go in and make sure there's some compaction there so that, you know, if you walk across that surface, that you're not stepping more than about a 1/2 inch, you know, leaving footprints much more than about a 1/2 inch. And then, so, you know, we've looked at site assessment, we've looked at complete renovation, you know, if you're going to plug, and we'll talk about that a little bit more, soil analysis, irrigation system analysis, soil amendments. Well, we come over here kind of to this final, we're going to plant, and then we're going to irrigate, and then do a little post-plant care. So obviously sodding is what we do as an industry and have for forever. Lots of advantages, that instant cover, uniform stand, generally fewer weeds. Timing of the planting is not as critical. You can sod pretty much year round, especially in the regions of the state where LVN is causing a problem. Fit the sod pieces together as tightly as possible. It's pretty amazing. I've walked through landscapes where you know, the sod installation is a trip hazard because they've left great big old, you know, gaps in between the slabs. And this last bullet point, tamp or roll the sod to remove air pockets to ensure good soil contact. Invest in a little roller, a water balanced roller. That is a step that is missed in so many landscape installs. But roll that sod out, and it smooths things out and then removes any of those air pockets. And roots don't like to grow through air pockets as well. From plugging, of course, plugging is planting, you know, these small plugs of mature turf in the soil. It's a little different than buying a pallet of sod and taking a machete and chopping it up, because, you know, sod comes in without roots on it. Whereas in a plug tray, this essentially is a potted plant that you are transplanting. So the root system is all there. The bigger the plug, the farther apart they can be. And then after planting as well, the site should be rolled. And so this is not St. August, this is another grass species, but you can see here on 7 August, plugs, were put in within about 6 weeks, had pretty much complete coverage, going into a bare soil installation. We'll look at that, the number of plugs that are needed. This could get kind of costly. And so, I mean, on the short term, we may think it's less expensive, but when you start pricing out the plugs and the labor and all of that, it can be pretty costly. And so there's actually calculators on the internet where you can, put your square footage of your lawn in, and it'll tell you, these are 12 inches apart, these are 18 inches apart, how many plugs, you would need to order to be able to plug. And so again, if your site is not that bad, you can plant a resistant variety in there and then just let it run over time. And it will eventually take over. And as the Floratam that is impacted by the Lvn continues to subside, then the new grass will just tend to take over. If you're in that situation where the grass is already pretty rough, we're going to take a sod cutter to it and get it out of there. Post-planting care, you don't want that site to get too dry or too wet, so apply just enough moisture per irrigation cycle to keep that sod soil layer moist and then the top layer of the soil moist. Realize water is going to move down, and as that water moves down, those roots are going to follow after it. Gently stressing the turf isn't going to hurt it too bad. Now, gently is kind of the key word there. But now here's one of the challenges. Irrigating plugs can result in over irrigation of the existing turf, which will result in disease, not LVN, but many of those others that Romina had referenced. Okay, so you can, trying to keep your plugs alive, you can, cause some damage to some of the grass that was already there. I also want to interject here, your water management districts all over the state have very different guidelines as to when you can do what, and you want to make sure that you check in on that. Begin mowing as soon as the sod and the plugs offer some resistance to tugging. Go out there and do the little tug test, and as soon as that sod is knitted down enough that you can get a mower across it, do so. And then, as I'll reiterate this, do not fertilize for 30 to 60 days following planting. We want to be good environmental stewards, and putting fertilizer out there pre-plant or as soon as the sod hits the ground, coupled with all that irrigation that's going to be put on to keep the sod alive or these plugs alive, and there's no root system, those nutrients will leach into the water and cause a problem. And so, wrap up here. We've decided it's time for a change. Now what? These 10 steps are pretty essential, regardless to whether we're putting new plugs in the ground or whether we're putting new sod. Don't skip any of these. When we skip any of these, we're going to have a less than successful renovation of our LVN affected site. And so with that, I'll stop sharing my screen.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Unruh. Can always count on you to get us back on time. So with that ends all of our presentations today. I'm going to turn it over to Henry. I think, Henry, there's a few questions in the queue. And then also I'm going to ask any of the panelists if they answered any questions that they think they need to bring up in front of the whole group. Please go ahead and do so as well. So Henry, go ahead.
Yeah, I have one question here. Does mosaic disease cause a root issue in its early stages before necrosis, or is the damage mainly on the foliage?
Yeah, I can take that one. There is an association with mosaic and root rot. Gammanomyces is the fungus that causes takeout root rot, and we frequently see, as Romina mentioned, both diseases, mosaic and the root rot, on the same samples. Now, the virus, in addition to causing the mosaic and then lethal viral necrosis, reduces the vigor of the turf plant and can make it more susceptible or more likely to develop root rot symptoms because of that lack of vigor, because of that sickness, the disease that the virus is causing. So it doesn't cause it, but it makes the turf more susceptible to that fungus that does, I guess, if that makes sense.
All right, next one. Is there any research or knowledge on LVN and the use of microbes?
As far as microbes to control or prevent LVN, there really hasn't been any research in that area. You know, with turfgrass, a lot of times we go to crop plants and look for research there that we can pull from, both for the results, but also for future direction of our research. When we look at Sugarcane Mosaic Virus, it causes problems with corn or maize. We look there for potential solutions to apply to turf. We look at sugarcane as a major crop. And in both those cases, really all cases for plant viruses, the solution is improved plant genetics. And with sugarcane varieties that have succumbed to SCMV over time, they're replaced with resistant varieties. When that resistance is overcome, it's replaced again. And so that's where we're headed with turf. We don't know of any sprays of solutions of microbes or others that can alter that plan for us. Vaccines, you know, just out of reach as far as what it would cost and the potential for working with plants to get that to happen. So improved plant genetics in the way of new varieties that are resistant to it or the direction that I see moving forward that are going to be fruitful for us.
Right, thank you. Next one. If an area where LVN is known to be high is recommending homeowners where 9 or 10 use lawn service to wait to remediate, are we potentially increasing spread?
Yeah, that's a great question that has come up several times with homeowners concerned that if they wait to replace the lawn, are they contributing to the spread? Or two, if they select something like a palmetto that can get the virus that shows a mild symptom, are they still serving as sources of inoculum for their neighbors? And the answer is twofold. One, yes, you are serving as a source of inoculum for your neighbors. But two, the second part of that is it doesn't matter really as far as the rate of spread. We don't have any evidence to suggest that leaving a more resistant plant that harbors a low titer of the virus impacts the epidemiological spread or the rate of spread within a community. As was mentioned earlier, I think by Bill and Lori, you know, we have seen communities try to eliminate the virus from lawns by killing lawns and resodding, and it hasn't worked. We haven't been able to stop that spread or really even slow it down locally, the local spread within a community. So you will serve as a source, but don't feel bad about it. I guess is the answer there.
All right, I have no more questions here.
So again, I'm just going to ask our panelists if there's any questions that were brought up that may have been answered through the chat, through the typing, or if you have any final points that you'd like to present on the way out of here. Everybody's quiet. Well, I just want to go ahead and thank all the panelists for presenting today. Thank you for your time and your knowledge that you've shared with us, your experiences. I'd like to thank all the attendees that have come out to listen to this presentation. And we will be sending out a link one more time. We'll be sending out a link after the presentation so that everybody can watch it on their own. And if you do check back through the chat, I think there was a few things. Bill Shaw posted the website that he had put in his presentation, and I think Dr. Unruh also put in the different cultivars that Dr. Dale was using for his mixed cultivar trial. So if you want to scroll through chat, you can see those. And I'm not sure if that'll be there when we have the recorded part, but if not, we can always get that information out. So look forward to getting a post-presentation survey, and then also we'll send out the link as well. So thank you all for attending today.